Hello friends, family, fellow patriots. Lord Stompy here, welcome. The following discussion we're about to have is a very, very important key discussion on immigration into the West. What I'm about to discuss are some key reasons why our elites are currently flooding Western nations at this point in time with tens of millions of Indian people. There are some very deep, important geopolitical reasons for what is happening. Now, our Western elites will never tell the European people what the actual reasons are. They will not discuss their deep, long-term geopolitical strategies with the goyim on the street. These geopolitical strategies are basically kept within elite circles. And essentially, the very high up Western elites, and when I say Western elites, I basically mean the circles above our politicians and our prime ministers, our presidents. Our politicians don't really make any key decisions on the medium to long-term futures of our nations. That's not their job. There are other elites, elite circles that essentially we don't really even know much about. The average useless eater here on the streets is deliberately kept in the dark. They're not allowed to know what the medium to long-term future plans that our leaders have for our nations and our people. And I wish to discuss some of those plans with you, and I will show a broader geopolitical plan for the medium and long term here in the West. And this ties in with why our elites are flooding our nations with millions of foreigners, and especially Indians, because India is key to the Western plan for the future. So, first of all, we have to look at what geopolitics is. Geopolitics and geostrategy. Now, the godfather of geopolitics and geostrategy is a genius of a man called Halford Mackinder, Sir Halford Mackinder. You can look him up. He was a British guy, and some of his original philosophies, strategies, and observations that he made about geopolitics and geostrategies, they still apply today. So one of Halford Mackinder's key strategic ideas was the Mackinder World Island. And he had basically a Mackinder world map that essentially, from the point of view of this strategic map of the world, was Eurasia was the center of geopolitical world power, right? The landmass of Eurasia, right? Mackinder theorized that all the other important land masses in the world are actually pivoting around Eurasia. And this is a key strategy, a key observation that still applies today. Geostrategists still apply Halford Mackinder's observations about Eurasia. So, in Israel, they actually have have a mural up. I believe it's in Tel Aviv, a very large mural up in public of the Halford-Mackinder world island map with Eurasia as the centre. Now let's think about Eurasia as the geopolitical centre of power in the world. Mackinder theorised that Eurasia is bordered by Russia, Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. And this is a correct observation of the world. So he basically said all these other land masses, all these other land powers are pivoting around the Eurasian landmass. And he said if you end up controlling the Eurasian landmass, you will be able to exert huge amounts of control and influence on the other land masses that surround you. And if you look at this from a geostrategic point of view, he's correct. This is the reason why in recent decades the Belt and Road Initiative is steaming ahead, full steam. This is China and China's allies are trying to exert their influence, and they're trying to control the trade route that is going through Eurasia. If you control the trade route, you have a direct beeline all the way from Russia down into North Africa, down into the Middle East, and straight down to all the way down to the bottom of the African continent. Now, another thing about the Eurasian landmass is this is the mass that separates the American continent from the European continent. And this is of great strategic interest at this point in time to China and Russia, who essentially, China and Russia over the last few decades have, there's been a build-up of deep hostilities between China, Russia, Europe, and USA. So if China and Russia control the Eurasian landmass, and the Russian geopolitical philosopher Alexander Dugin, has actually written articles and books about this. He basically said if Russia ends up gaining control over Eurasia, essentially they will be able to put a physical wedge in between the American continent and the European continent, and that will break down the ability of the American continent and the European continent to transport trade goods, military goods, troops, all these sort of things. And it will make everything a lot harder strategically for America and Europe to cooperate together upon the globe of the world. All right, this is very clever thinking from Alexander Dugin. He's put forth some very, very serious strategies to block the trade routes. So here we have a massive problem that's been brewing for generations, actually. Our Western elites have been aware of the Eurasian centre of power theory. It's actually not just a theory, it's a reality. If you look at the way that the nations on the globe are arranged, we can't really change the physical arrangement of nations on the globe. So geopolitics and geostrategy is incredibly important to the medium and long-term future of nations and how they operate in the world. And this is something our elites will never discuss with the average grunt on the ground. Essentially, geopolitics and geostrategy, theories and philosophies about these matters are the elites keep them within their own circles. That is their own game that they wish to play, and they play that with each other. And the broad mass of people in Western nations are just dragged along behind the elites in these geopolitical games that they're playing. So, what is crucially important to our Western leaders in the medium to long term is for them to keep some skin in the game in Eurasia. So what they need in Eurasia, as the geopolitical tensions and conflicts in that area progressively heat up, and they have been, right? There's more and more tension in the area. The Russians, Chinese, they've really started playing hardball in the Eurasian area. And what the Western nations are doing, America and the European nations, is for quite a while now, they've been working on making alliances with India. And the Western alliance with India actually goes back generations, a lot longer than the average person would suspect. Now, the alliance between the Indians and the West has mainly been at the elite level. Okay? Even if you go back as far as the late 19th century, when Britain was basically in charge of India, right? I was looking into the history of a lot of famous Indian nationalists and just famous figures that came from India in the colonial past. And I was just looking at these people from the point of historical interest. And to my surprise, I found that most of these Indian elites, these leaders, these spiritual leaders, Indian nationalists even, a very large percentage of them actually were educated in English public schools. Okay, they were actually, it's really funny because a large percentage of these people were actively anti-English, but at the same time they had a very strong connection with the English elites. They were rubbing shoulders with them at these elite schools. And so it wasn't quite how the average grunt on the ground in the West or in India, for that matter, would suspect. Was as much as there was some disagreements and tensions between the Indian leadership and the British leadership, they essentially did cooperate a lot more than people would expect. Okay, so there's always been an element of cooperation ever since the late 19th century between the Indian elites and the Western elites. Now, the Indian elites will complain and they'll moan about my colonialism, and they'll put on a bit of a show. And most of that's for the Indian public, but when they go behind the scenes, they'll actually be shaking hands with British nobility. They'll be, drinking gin and tonic with them. So there is and has always been a level of elite cooperation between the Indian elites and the Western elites. Now, what's happening now? Now that Russia, China, Iran as well, Iran's actually a pretty big player in that region as well. All these nations are starting to really exert muscle in the Eurasian region, and that these nations know why they're doing it. They know that the Eurasian region is hugely important for geostrategy and for the medium and long-term future of their nations. If they can secure the Eurasian region under their own power, they will be able to really put a spanner in the works for the Western powers. It'll make the future of Western power a lot harder in the world. And on top of that, if you control the Eurasian region, essentially you will be able to exert huge amounts of influence and power. You'll be able to project it from Eurasia into the rest of the world. So what the Western powers have quietly been doing behind the scenes for generations now, and now this is beginning to come into the open, is they're trying to make a very, very strong strategic alliance with India, because India is their gateway to the Eurasian region, and the Western powers need to have skin in the game in Eurasia. Now, this is a huge reason why the Western powers have been giving, for generations now, have been giving huge amounts of aid to India. They've been putting in a lot of effort to help Indian development, manufacturing, all these kind of things. They're giving a lot of military aid to India as well. And so this is the reason why the Western powers are aligning with India, and this has been going on for a long time. So what the Western powers need is a large nation with a huge population base in Eurasia. So India fits that bill. They also need ports so that they can get ships between America, Australia, New Zealand. It's vitally important that they're able to get ships into ports that are connected to Eurasia. And part of the deal of cozying up with India, and this deal must have been struck a long time ago, but we're seeing it play out in real time now. Part of the deal has been that the Western nations at some point, they promised the Indian leaders that they will take on tens of millions or possibly even hundreds of millions of Indian immigrants into Western nations. So this has been a secret handshake deal that was done a long time ago between the Indian elites and the Western elites. And what we European people now are seeing this play out on the ground within our own nations. Right? And the deal that the European elites have made with the Indian elites, they've said, well, look, you know, in the future, things are going to heat up in the Eurasian region. There's going to be a very large struggle for power in the Eurasian region. And we want to make an alliance with India and project Western power through India. And India would have said, well, if that's the case, we're a hugely populated country. In fact, we're overpopulated, and if you guys want to deal with us, you have to take the spillover population from our country into your nations. And the Western elite said, well, that's cool, because that ties in with our long-term plan, the Kalergi plan for white genocide within the European nations. Okay, so this is a really sweet deal all around, because not only will the Western elites be projecting their power into Eurasia through India, but the Indians are going to be able to project demographic power, which is that's a different geopolitical power, but it's a very, very important one. If you just have a huge weight of numbers of people from your nation that's just dominating the globe, that's a very, very potent and important, powerful force that you have at your disposal. So the Indians, their medium to long-term plan that they've negotiated with the West is that they're going to basically flood the world with Indians, and India's going to exercise demographic power through very many geographic regions of the globe. And the Europeans are going to enforce military and trading power through Eurasia using India. So that's the deal that's been struck, and that's the reason why all this shit's going down. And we really have to look at this in a very, very sober, serious fashion, because this is what is going on. And we have to rethink our strategy as European nationalists as to how we're going to cope with this future for the West, because this has been set in stone for generations now. The elites always set their plans 50 to 100 years ahead. That's why they keep their plans secret from us. And whatever their plans are, they just drag us along behind them. And basically, we find out what those plans are as they unfold, whereas our elites know 50 to 100 years ahead of time, basically, what is going to unfold. So, as European nationalists, we have to start getting a lot smarter. We really have to look at geostrategy and geopolitics and how the elite classes worldwide are using they're basically using very, very sophisticated long-term geostrategy as the blueprint for the future of their nations. So we have to start getting good at understanding this, interpreting it, and coming up with our own. It's imperative for our survival. Okay, because if we understand what their geopolitical blueprint is, we are able to arm ourselves with knowledge and come up with counter strategies for the survival of our people. So that's all I've got to say on this subject for now, but this is actually one of my most important videos that I've ever done, and I hope that some intelligent European nationalists out there who haven't considered this information can actually start thinking about this and researching it, because this is something that really, really needs looking into. Thank you so much, my friends. God bless you all. Deus Vult.